Welcome back to the Quick Start Guide. We are Peter and Sibylla from the Big House Project.
Dealing with conflict is very important if you want to start a project like that, because good dealing with conflict is a clue to trust the other people of the project.
So peace is not about not having conflict, but having conflict in a peaceful manner. It's a quote from Lawrence Butler, who was the guy that codified consensus back in the anti-war movement in the 70s.
Having a good conflict helps to build up trust. Having a good conflict helps to pull out the best solutions, the win-win solutions for everyone, so that the needs of the members of the project can be met best.
I think most of us could be forgiven for trying to avoid conflict or reduce the amount of conflict in our life. But what if we need conflict to help us grow and evolve as a species and as a community?
Without conflict, we don't get to the deeper layers of our personality. We don't notice when there are layers that are not useful for us anymore, that we see conflict as a normal part of life. See the feelings that are involved in conflict as good, because feelings always want to tell us something. And knowing that needs are normal and that people are wired to fulfill their own needs and to cooperate to fulfill needs of others.
So often I think conflict is about our position, our immediate kind of problems and issues, but if we look at what's underneath that in terms of our needs and our values, things that are much deeper to our kind of being, then we can solve conflict more productively.
If in the community we learn to embrace conflict, we learn that conflict is this means to evolve the community, to evolve the personality, to create new things, to start building up prototypes and test ways of living together, and test ways of organizational things, just testing things, find out, okay, that's what we like, that's what we don't like. When some people say we don't like it, there's the next conflict, but the conflict is always the chance to improve things.
So this film, As It Is in Heaven, it's a Swedish film. It's about a choir in a small Swedish town, and they really just express their emotions. There was a man that was called names all through his childhood, and one day he just kind of had a big yell about it, and it got it off his chest, and there was a few doors slammed and a few loud words, but they came back to their choir and they went on. Just this idea of normalizing the expression of our emotion and our upset instead of avoiding it.
And the second feature of that film that I like is it's showing how this group is growing together, how they start managing their conflicts better and better, how they start to collaborate and help themselves and help each member of the group to get more and more happy.
The good thing about a group is it has a diversity of expertise with conflict and a diversity of temperament. So generally there's always someone in the group who's calm and can assist those that are dysregulated. This is from Marshall Rosenberg. He says that those of us working for peace and change sometimes not aware that our language can sometimes be very unpeaceful, and he names arguments and blaming as two particular things we have to watch. So this is a really good place to start when we're talking about conflict. How are we communicating? In what ways do we communicate? We all have this deep need to be valued and to belong. When people judge and blame us, it does hurt. It always has the same effect. It pushes people apart. This is one of the hardest things about communication in groups. We might understand judgments and blaming conceptually, but when it comes to moments of conflict, we just find ourselves slipping right back to it.
Especially when the conflict starts to get really emotional. For me, it's very difficult not to use judgmental and blaming words.
A related trap for peacemakers is analysis. You get a room full of activists or change makers together, and one of the first things we start doing is to analyse, and we very quickly analyse other people's behaviour. It is a trap.
Doing the analyzing part, it keeps us on a very superficial layer. And as Einstein already said, you have to solve conflict on a different layer than where it arose.
So in the first sort of level of MVC, we have this idea of an observation compared to a judgment. So a judgment tends to use relatively small sentences of words that evaluate others' behaviour. As an example here, Janice works too much. How much is too much is different for one person and another person, but if we put ours down on someone else, then we are judging. As we make a more pure observation that's more descriptive, we have to use more words. Here's an example. Yesterday evening, Nancy bit her fingernails while she was watching TV. Instead of Nancy is bad to her nails, or Nancy is nervous, or any other thing that we could say. It's just very descriptive, it's very precise. Making a statement like this, we can get rid of most of the evaluation and the judgment.
The other person can take the statement then a lot better. If I'm blamed, my whole system goes in adversity. I don't like that. And I start to defend myself. And when I start to defend myself, I start fighting.
So the next layer is the feeling layer, and if you've grown up in New Zealand or Britain, you'll probably be familiar with the idea of a stiff upper lip that we don't tend to typically, certainly our parents' generation, show our feelings.
And as a kid, we very often were not allowed to show our feelings either. My mother told me I shouldn't be angry, I shouldn't be sad, and even being happy she didn't really like.
Yes, so after our observations and our removing judgments from our language, this idea of building a new vocabulary, a richer vocabulary of feelings is very important.
Feelings are mine, they cannot be discussed. If I am sad, I am sad. And that's also what is up at the moment.
A lot of writers such as Daniel Goleman talk about this idea of emotional intelligence, that there is more to being smart than just being cognitively smart. And so in this sense, emotional literacy is part of this work in groups.
Increase your vocabulary you are using for feelings. Be more precise in describing things. Stay on the neutral place.
Noticing when we're feeling what we're feeling is 90% of the battle there. The third layer is needs. We talk about needs, and a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to be needy though. Am I really allowed to have needs? This is something that is a growth point for us mostly.
Before we said that the conflict cannot be solved on the layer of the analysis. So here with the needs, we have the layer where the conflict can be solved. Because needs are universal. It doesn't matter to what society you belong. Needs are human, and they are the same all over the world.
Yeah, there are some things that we all need: food, water, shelter, to belong, to connect, to have a sense of meaning and agency in it, having a sense of purpose. For example,
the needs are universal, but the strategy to meet the needs, there usually conflicts arise. So if we stay on the strategy layer and start the analysis there, we cannot go on. Go to the needs of every conflict involved member and find common needs and find really creative strategies that might meet all the needs.
it's about slowing the conversation down to actually inquire, be curious about what these needs are. What is actually my need right now, and do I understand the needs of the other people in this conflict and in our group?
I have experienced that myself. It is not easy to name my own need, because sometimes we just feel uncomfortable. We know that one need is not met. If you don't know your own need, then you are just talking on the level of judgments and blamings. And being able to give this special need you have at the moment a name makes it easier for the other person and for the other conflict parties to collaborate.
Once we're clear about our need, then the fourth step is to put that into a clear request of someone. Would you be willing to help me with such and such? That request has to be clear, present, very active language, positively expressed what we do want, not what we don't want.
Don't forget, if we tell what we don't want, we put energy in this part we really don't like. If we tell what we want, we give what we would like to have energy. And if we only tell what we don't want, the other person might use a strategy what the other person thinks is exactly meeting my need, and my need still cannot be met. So the conflict is not solved.
So here's an example of what this looks like when we put these four steps together. When you speak so frequently at the meeting, I'm sure you have been to meetings when one or two people use much of the speaking space. When you speak so frequently at a meeting, I feel uncomfortable because, so the feeling there might be annoyed, or it might be afraid that the quiet voices are not going to get a chance to speak. Something of that nature. Uncomfortable is a sort of a semi-quasi feeling word. I value inclusion. I want us to have and share time more evenly. So there we're saying what it is that is important about this. Not what the person has done wrong, or that there's some moral failure in the person. Really just saying clearly what it is that we want. Okay, so don't assume that they understand necessarily what you mean by inclusion. The request makes that really clear. Would you be willing to make some space for others to speak? Would you be willing to speak for 1/10 if there are 10 members of the time? Whatever it is that you want to be very specific about. This is quite a common example. It comes up in groups. We have someone who complains a lot, speaks a lot about the past, tells a lot of stories from the past that don't seem relevant. These are sometimes difficult things to respond to, so really it's just fine-tuning the observation layer. When you speak about the past, when you speak about people who are not present, when you speak negatively about people who are not present, it's just trying to get that observation as non-judgmental as you can. It's never perfect, but the effort you make there makes it easier for the person to hear. When we say something like this, it would often be wise to preface it with some empathy. I'm really interested in hearing what you're saying. I really want to connect with you. I value you in my life. I just find it hard to do when you use so many words, for example. All four parts are important. Often when we communicate to others, we use one of these parts, and the four parts are really important that they're done together. This sounds a little bit mechanical in the beginning, but as you get better at it, it starts to sound more natural language. So a few tips here. It doesn't necessarily mean that both parties need to understand this way of communicating. Just as you listen for these four layers, and you might have to translate in your mind, to listen between the lines to hear what the feeling and the need is.
This is especially important if one of the parties is getting in this little bit of more angry space and is not able anymore to do pure NVC. Then listen for the feelings, listen for the needs, and maybe you just make a guess, say, could it be that you're feeling this and you would need that? Helps the other one to calm down.
If you have really no idea, when in doubt, empathize. Feeding back what you heard is always going to help that person calm down a little bit. From that pace of calmness, they can start to understand where they are, what they need. The other thing that I note here is that in groups we really need to get more comfortable giving feedback. We tend to not say things that are bothering us. The conflict just goes under the carpet. We hope that it will go away. Guess what? It doesn't.
Even if it was a quite small thing. When these small things keep to repeat again and again, they pile up, and at the end it's going to be a big thing, and the conflict is not that easily to be solved anymore.
When there is conflict, to try to slow the process down. In groups, you can use this techniques of a reflective round, of making a pause between people, picking up, say, a talking stick. Anything you can do to create a few seconds between interactions, because you know what happens when people start to argue and go into sort of combat mode. The listening is really the first casualty. This is one of many quotes similar. A person's success in life can usually be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations he or she is willing to have. We tend to walk away from difficult conversations, we tend to avoid them, but actually that's the key really to being able to tolerate an uncomfortable conversation, to sit with an uncomfortable feeling is really the key to our healthy emotional development and the success of our groups.
And to sit with the uncomfortable feelings, there you need two parties. The one that is initiating the topic and the other one that is involved in the topic.
Yes, if you can all, through the conversation, get to the point where you understand each other's needs and you can smile and hug and be friends again, then you have really achieved something quite important.
You achieved greater intimacy and you increased your trust in each other.
Mm-hmm.
And trust is the bond, the glue of community.
So this is a picture of a human library program. It's a place where you can go to borrow a person for half an hour and you sit down with them and you get to ask them all the questions you have. And it speaks to us about curiosity, about this idea of being interested in someone else's life, someone else's perspectives, values and needs. And to solve conflicts, this is something that we have to have.
We have to be curious about what the other person's needs are, the other group's needs are. We have to be curious about how we can meet their needs. If we are on this collaboration path, we want our needs to be met, but at the same time, we know that the needs of every people are important, and so we help the other persons as well to get their needs met.
To sum up, to achieve this degree of societal transformation that we're all aiming for, it's time for us to make a shift away from analysis and from protest to a place where we have a dialogue about what it is that we value, what it is we want, and what it is we aspire to.
A place for dialogue, a place for constructive conflicts, a place for connection and collaboration.
We are the Big House Project, and we are working on housing cooperatives and exploring what it means to really collaborate.
If you want to get more information, go on our homepage. We also have a newsletter. You can subscribe for the newsletter on our homepage.
And we will see you next time.
See you. Bye.